Hey everyone, welcome back to Eli's Echo. We're continuing our guest series with a special guest, Ivor Terret. I've known Ivor for going on 10 years now. I had the pleasure of meeting him when I first broke into executive protection while I was at Apple, and our relationship has continued since then. I hope you enjoyed today's podcast as Ivor shares his thoughts on leadership, on entrepreneurship, and just his general insights, which is a fantastic conversation. So I really hope you enjoy the conversation. Do me a favor, share this podcast with someone you think that might enjoy the content. Wherever you're listening to me at, be it on a podcast from Spotify or Anchor or on YouTube, do me a favor, drop a like, hit a subscribe button, and leave a comment. Let me know what you think about these series. This is one of these series when it comes to special guests that really excites me because there's only so much of my voice I think you can all listen to. So it's really exciting when we're able to bring in a special guest. So I hope you enjoy the content. Let me know what you think afterward. Thank you very much. Here we go. All right. Now we're recording. Luckily we're not live, but at least we're recording. So, welcome everyone. I'm your host, Eli Albalos. This is Eli's Echo Podcast. And today we have a special guest, Ivor Terret, is here to really talk about his worldviews, but also just the depth of experience he has globally in just a variety of industries. And so, rather than try and give a high-level introduction to Ivor is going to do that for himself. But before I do that, I turn it over. Welcome, Ivor Terret, with a clap. Awesome. So, Ivor, thank you for coming. Thank you for being here.
Eli, thanks for having me. I've seen your podcasts and I've been following them since you told me about them, and it's really great. So I'm super excited to be here with you, and thanks for the opportunity to have a chat.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Yeah, I appreciate the support. Definitely appreciate you having as a guest. But one of the things I was excited about having you here for, and I chatted with Christian. It's been a month now, and I know that's you and I kind of met at it was the EP conference in Texas like 10 years ago.
Yep.
And you're like, hey, where do you work? Yeah. You're like, oh, you work with Apple? I have someone you need to talk to. And then I remember you walking me over to Christian, and it was history from there, man. But so appreciate you being here. So if you can, I forgot to do this before, so I'm gonna make sure we get to it, is, can you just give us a high-level background, who you are, like what your background is, and then, certainly I want to make sure that we get introduced to your company that you started in and all that experience. So I'm gonna turn it over to you.
Sure, thanks, Eli. So I'll start with the company. The company is split into two. We've got Enablement Advisors, which is a boutique security solutions company, if you will. We deal with primarily multinational corporations and single-family offices around the world. We help them mitigate risk, and what risk they can't mitigate, we help them manage through consulting and training, and some specialized protection operations. Usually the specialized protection operations are covert in nature, all legal and nothing really secret squirrel. It's just where we differentiate and where we shine. Our solutions are both from the ground up and bottom down, so they're strategic and tactical. And the second part of the business is the Enablement Academy of Leadership Excellence, which is a pet project of mine, and it's designed to develop tomorrow's leaders in the industry. Something I'm passionate about, and something I came to during the COVID when none of us were traveling, and I could focus on my own business strategy. I sat back and I thought, through 30 years of consulting, I seem to be picking up on the same patterns or the same gaps in not in all organizations, but the majority of organizations. And I looked for the common denominators, and what I found was a lot of leaders in the industry, and not all leaders, so it's definitely not singling anyone out. But if I look at 30 years, the majority of people that were in mid and senior leadership positions got there through time in the industry, through successes, through being well liked, through networking, through politics, through whatever it is. But there was no actual training to prepare them for those positions. So if I worked at Enablement Advisors and I started out in a protection role, and I worked my way up to shift lead or shift manager, and then I worked my way up to team lead, and then to detail lead, and then eventually to director. What I'd have under my belt is my experience from enablement advisors. I wouldn't know the breadth and depth of all the solutions out there, only what I'd been exposed to. And I had no formal training in leadership or management for that matter. So the Enablement Academy is designed to prepare tomorrow's leaders. And it's something I'm super passionate about, and I think it actually interjects or integrates well with your podcast.
Yeah.
In fact, we just did, if you'll allow me a short plug, just did a very successful leadership seminar in Palo Alto, California, just a few months ago, where we had mid and senior leaders from multinational corporations and some large single-family offices. And we had a head of leadership who is Khani Davidson, who is an incredible leader herself, and she's an incredible developer of leaders. She led the program, and I assisted her. And it was a very successful program, and we'll be doing several of those next year, both in the UK and the US. So that's pretty cool. My own background, Eli, I've taken a new approach to talking about my background. I don't do it anymore. And I'll tell you why. I had an epiphany. I was at a conference in London just last weekend. And when I was working on my presentation, and I've usually got an about me presentation, it's got all these points of who I am and what I did and what I think I did and what I think people want to hear I did. And really the bottom line is it doesn't matter. What matters is that me and my business are successful in solving problems that many others can't. Yeah. So what I did I can talk about it. I think it's not relevant. I think it's nice for me to talk about it because I like hearing myself talk about it. It doesn't matter. What really matters is that we help people. We have unique solutions to help people, and I think that's what matters.
That's awesome.
My background is I'm just another guy, trying to get by, Eli.
No, I love it. I want to come back to one thing that you mentioned on the introduction, but first with your company, but first is definitely respect. Like it's really hard to like have this laundry list of, oh, here's my autobiography. Let me tell you all about me, why I'm important. So I definitely get where you're coming from there. How about then tell us where are you from, right? Because I think is for some of my listeners, they're not used to this industry that you and I that work in and live in, right? And they're not used to hearing potentially someone with your accent. So how about instead telling them then, where are you from, maybe where you live, and maybe, because then that contributes to who you are.
So first thing is, I don't have an accent. Everyone else does. Second bit, I grew up in South Africa, and over 2.5, almost 3 decades ago, I moved from South Africa to Tel Aviv, Israel, where I'm based today. So hence the mostly South African accent, but I've actually been living in Israel longer than I lived in South Africa. And I spend about half of each year pre-COVID, and we're building back up to that. I spend about half of each year traveling for work. I'm based in Israel now, work all over the world. We do a bit of work in Israel. Most of the work we do in Israel is on the classic sort of protection side, CEOs and family offices coming to visit. But the vast majority of what we do is abroad.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. And that I appreciate that because, for all I've always known you, I've always understood you're from Israel. But again, I didn't realize that background is South Africa. So, but you're right, because that's the accent. You're like, well, that's a little bit different. Or, the accent that I hear is the one I was calling out. The other thing you mentioned too, just to give a little color to folks, is you talked about when you're talking about enablement advisors and that first vertical that you're developing, you have your Enablement Academy, which sounds fantastic. We'll touch on that here because that definitely gets to the heart of kind of the messaging I have about leadership motivation. But that first one, you talked about, single family, multinational corporations, but then you also mentioned when you're talking about single family, what you specialize in is helping them mitigate risk.
So what kind of risks, just to add color to folks that might not be familiar, like what kind of risk do you kind of specialize in?
The whole spectrum, really. So everything from physical risk to the executives of the family office. So not even the principal, but the executives of the family office as well.
Yeah.
To the principal persons and their families. So any sort of physical risk, usually they are ultra high net worth. Um, Physical risk to the business, a family office, and a lot of people don't realize this. A family office is a business.
Yeah.
It's a business serving one family, but it's absolutely a business. So business risk, reputational risks, and of course information risks as well. So our take on information security or infosec is not limited to cyber, and it's not all other info, it's all information. So it's information that's stored and communicated through IT, through technology, as well as any kind of other information as well. Is it easy to find out who owns which family office it is? Is it easy to find out where they are? Is it easy to find out who the CEO is or who the CFO is? Sometimes they are as valuable or more valuable to a criminal organization than the principal themselves, who has 24/7 security.
Yeah. No, and I appreciate that, and that's great color for folks that maybe just aren't familiar with the industry, because I think it's an interesting dynamic. Certainly, when you and I met, I was starting off the EP program for Apple. I had no idea what the heck I was doing. It was just, I don't know if it was the right place, wrong time, or wrong place, wrong time. It depends on when you ask.
We never knew that, Eli. We never knew that. Don't tell anyone.
Good. Okay,
no
good.
One knows
Good.
that.
No one knew because I played it off really well. But what's interesting, and you hit on it, is what people don't realize is, these high net worth individuals, ultra net worth individuals, like you mentioned, that they do have this business that is their personal protection, and then you are able to come in and really help solidify, secure that personal business. But it is interesting because I don't know that it's kind of sounds funny. It's like a rich person's problem, right? Like you have to deal with protecting your identity, protecting your business, and so no, I'm glad you add color to that, because I know when I chatted with Christian, I know we all have this little triangle of experience together. We didn't touch on that, so that's great experience you bring and color. So one thing I want to touch on then is how this switch for you, right? So like based on your expertise, getting to know you, your background, as you mentioned, before we kind of started recording, you kind of, it sounds like you fell into the protection world. EP specifically, you're really into mitigating high risk. So now, like, all that makes sense, right? And and kind of you're on this second vertical now that you create within your company, kind of like myself, is like, why the switch over into like, now let me teach people about leadership? Not because like the natural transition is, let me teach people about EP. Let me teach people about protection and high risk. Not, let me have all this experience, now let me teach people how to be a good leader.
It's a great question. The main and the first answer, the honest, no BS answer, is I want to. That's the first thing.
Perfect. Great answer, because I'm in the same boat. I want to.
And the reason I want to is I've been teaching a lot of great people in the industry for decades how to do the physical aspects of protection. We've been teaching people how to manage programs, how to run. We've been teaching people security as security in all different realms, whether it is event or executive protection or any, COVID protection, what's it called, the ERT response team. All of that stuff we've been doing, and it's great. But it's going to sound so cheesy what I'm going to say, Eli. It's going to sound so insincere, but it's 100% sincere. I wanted to give back. I want to give back to the industry a little bit. And where I felt I could give back is teaching the folks how to fish, as it were.
Yeah.
So if I can help develop tomorrow's leaders, that's great, because I haven't only given that individual something for themselves and their own success. It's all the people they lead that will success, not because of me, because of them, right? But it's a global success. And That's honestly why. During COVID, during the first 3 months of COVID, when we were all sweating and wondering what's going to happen, health-wise, apocalypse-wise, vaccine-wise, conspiracy-wise, lack of income, it all came down on all of it at once, and we were really getting hammered from every direction. And in a moment of, dare I say it, weakness, I thought that I'm going to go down the kumbaya route and try to give people back and help. And to give myself a little bit of a humble brag, admittedly, one of the things we did, which is partially led up to the leadership epiphany, is I actually worked with an organization in London called CTG Intelligence, which is a security event company with Pelham Row. And we put up an online, before everyone was nauseated from all the online stuff, we put up an online seminar, and all we did was we brought people from the industry with really inspiring stories. We brought people that had lost their limbs in Afghanistan and came to give motivational talks. We brought a very close friend of mine, Ivor, who unintentionally stopped a suicide bomber from going into a bar and was also seriously wounded when the explosion went off. And they just gave talks and inspired people. We brought the former head of hostage negotiation from the Met Police in London, just with amazing stories. And the point of that thing, that seminar or webinar, if you will, was quite simply to inspire people, to give them something different to think about, and to show how you can overcome such adversity. In a time of adversity, in a time of major stress, how these people overcame major things, we can do it too. So for me, COVID was actually a very humbling time and a very soft time. It brought out a very soft side in me, and admittedly, that was a big driver of the leadership thing. Of course, there's a business aspect, and I want to make money from it, but that's not the driver. That's the secondary. The driver is I want to help develop tomorrow's leaders in the industry, because although people complain about the industry, some people complain and say it's got to fix it, we've got to do this, we've got to do that. By far and large, I've been lucky to meet the people in the industry that I felt are good people. And I say lucky because sometimes people are talking about the bad people. There's a few bad apples, but most of the people in the industry are in the industry because they have a calling to protect others and are usually good people. And me and my team want to help them be better leaders for the industry. That's the honest truth. That's as simple as I can put it. So, yeah.
No, and that's great. I think kind of similar, I'm definitely in the same boat as, you kind of ask yourself at some point there's going to be some business aspect of it, because if I want to really pay attention to this, you kind of have to generate some type of income so that you can pay to be able to put that effort forward. But ultimately, to your point, is that it doesn't have to start there, right? And I think is similar to you is, even the motivation for this podcast, it originally kind of started like I wrote this, I just took it upon myself to just decide to write a book this year, and it was like a leadership book, and I'm like, I'm in this, educational program, like let me just put my ideas on paper, and it turned into this book, and I'm like, well, maybe, no one's ever going to want to even look at it, and the publisher says, okay, I'll publish it. So that's coming out next year. So part of the process, I was like, well, maybe I'll just start talking about a podcast and get something out there. But it really wasn't like, to your point, like I'm targeting, millions of dollars, or I'm going to be the world's best selling leadership enabler. Like, no, it kind of just started like, you kind of get tired of seeing mistakes in the industries. And in some sense, some of the mistakes are not only are they common, but they're simple, right? And
absolutely.
And like, you feel obligated to go like, well, why not? Let me just push some stuff out there to help others, because it'll help them, and downstream, it'll make them better, but it'll help me too. Because if I'm getting frustrated in these industries, then why not contribute to make things better in the long run, right?
Absolutely. And there's another aspect as well. You speak about the mistakes, but both you and I have also been exposed to incredible leaders in the industry or not, and we can learn from them. We've learned from them.
Yeah.
about their successes. I've had the opportunity to work with the most incredible people in the world, the most credible people in the industry, and to learn from not only their mistakes, but also their successes and their words of wisdom. You know, some of these people we've been exposed to in one sentence can just make light of a whole world for us.
Yeah.
And I think that's also valuable to a lot of people seeking their way in the industry today.
And I love that, you know, and it's something that it wasn't until recently that I really started to reflect on, right? Because, you know, and for listeners out there, I've said this before, there are certain things that I will never talk about, and there's certain things that Ivor will never talk about just because it's just, A, we're obligated not to, B, it's just not the right thing to do because you're exposed to these individuals. But reflecting on the things, and to your point, the experiences that I've had, absolutely, the stuff I can talk about are, you know, exposing others to these fantastic leaders, you know, like, and we're not going to name names on the podcast, folks, but I'll let you know, like, I imagine, you know, Ivor could also list like some of the world's most influential people in the world that he's been around, and even just being in the room with some of these folks and listening to how they think and how they approach the situation. Like everything else, you're going to get some bad leaders, but it's those good leaders that I think is reflecting on and figure out, okay, if this person can, like you said, summarize, you know, this belief or summarize this action in such a way, like, man, it's profound. How can I use that experience to help others? And so it's a fine balance you have to play.
Exactly. And we've been privileged. It would almost be criminal for us not to pass it on.
Yeah.
You know, teaching someone to kick down a door, that's great. It's important. It has its place.
Yeah.
But you know, how long can we do that for, and how long do we want to do that for? There's so much more out there.
Yeah. And to your point, like, as fun as it might be, like, at the end of the day, what does it matter? Like, someone's going to walk away. They might not ever have to use that skill ever again. Maybe they will. But, you know, if we can, you know, illuminate someone to, you know, leadership and skills and teach them to basically, like you said, a fishing of people, provide for themselves down the line because of information we can pass along, I think it does two things. One, makes them better in the end. But two, it also passes on that knowledge, right? And I think there's a lot there. You know, I think and I appreciate, like, this goes back to how we started the conversation today, is, like, you know, about your experience or asking you to highlight that. Like, it doesn't, like you said, like, it doesn't really matter all this laundry list of, you know, verbal resume I can give you. What matters is can I pass on knowledge that you're willing to then share with others? Because that's going to matter. People don't care about resume. People are going to care about that knowledge that passes on.
Right. People need to look forward, not backwards.
Yeah, I love it. So let's switch gears. I guess a little bit of switching gears. We're going to pivot just a little bit. When you and I met, you obviously were working for, at the time, it was AS Solutions, and why this switch to entrepreneurial, right? So now you're your business owner. You have this global business, many industry experts that work with you, that work for you. What made you want to switch to go entrepreneurial?
So I had my own business before. I had my own business since 2002. I had my first security business. I was working, when I left government service, I was working in a high-tech company, in a startup. And because we were living off investments and it was never certain that we were going to get investments, being who I am just as a person, I always had a plan B. So while I was doing that, I had my plan B, and I started building up my first security company. And I'd moonlight and I'd hire people to do the jobs while I was still working in high tech many years ago. So I had my first business back then, and I successfully managed it into the ground. It was a great business, but in short, the 2008 real estate crash and stock market crash, I didn't respond to that in the right way. And I landed up losing that business. And it was a fantastic learning experience. It was a fantastic time. I loved running it. It was great. And then I went to another company. And when I left that company, so we used to be my first business, Multi-Tier Solutions, we used to have software solutions, but we also used to do operations and training. We actually had a fantastic database for pattern recognition of threats, algorithms and facial recognition. This was in the early 2000s. And what I found was the corporate world said, that's great, but it's for governments. We don't need this. And government said, well, we do everything in-house. So we were way ahead of what the market wanted or would accept. So to make a living, we did training and we did COVID protection, EP. And one day Christian pinged me and said, hey, I like what training you guys are doing. We've got a client coming to Israel. Do you also do operations like this? And from here to there, we started being AS, the first AS solution. They had maybe 7 employees, right?
Yeah.
All Vikings, all Danes. We were their vendor in Israel. The relationship grew. And when I left the other security company, I phoned up Christian and said, hey, Christian, we're starting a training department. And Christian said, who? And I said, AS. And he said, really? I said, yep, when do we start? And we started AS Training Academy, which was a great experience. And after my time at AS, I figured, it was always a thing. I always wanted to run my own business. I'm also, for good and bad, and I think a lot of people would say for bad, I've got a very strong personality. I'm a very strong alpha as a person, and I'm happiest sort of leading from the front as opposed to being led. That's the truth. I'm happiest working for myself and running my organization, without any dreams of grandeur or wealth or riches. I'm simply have my own business because I want to. It makes me happy, and it's fun.
No, and I love that. And I think what's interesting too is the way you said it is your first business in 2008. You successfully managed it into the ground. And I think what's interesting is for some folks, like, that's super scary, right? I had a business. I had a CrossFit gym in 2008, right? And I had just started in 2008, and I successfully managed it into the ground in 2 years, right? And it was a great time. I took that leap of faith. But I think what's interesting is, anecdotally, everybody, hears about these amazing successes and stories. They think, the Zuckerbergs of the world, the Elon Musk's back in his PayPal days of the world, not to mention like Tesla and all these other things. Like, they hear all these successes, right? But what they don't realize is how many failures it took, how many successfully managing businesses into the ground, like how many of those did it take to get to the point where you get to that success? And I think what's interesting, and I call it, I'm sure you've heard about it too, like fear, the FEAR, like false events appearing real. Like, these false events, that fear, keep people from even taking that first step because
Absolutely.
They're afraid of that failure. But you got to be prepared for it.
So there's a few things to ponder. The one, and then we'll jump back to what you said, but I'll forget if I don't say it. The one is, one of my inspirations and someone who I learned a lot from between Multi-Tier Solutions and Enablement Advisors was Guy Kawasaki, who was a master evangelist for Apple. So he wrote a book, The Art of the Start, and he has a fantastic 10-minute summary. I think it's 10 minutes or 30-minute summary on The Art of the Start on YouTube. I recommend it for anyone interested in business. He talks about startups, tech startups, but it's applicable to any business. It's like an MBA in a few minutes. So that's the first thing, going back to your Apple days.
Art of the Start, Guy Kawasaki.
Art of the Start, yes. And that was the first. And the second thing to ponder is, how does one define failure and how does one define success? So failure with my first business, I lost a lot of personal income because I kept on pouring it into the business and to pay salaries instead of firing people when I should have fired people because we couldn't afford salaries. And at some point that personal, the personal equity ran out. And that's when I really had to close shop. So financially it was an absolute failure. But how much did I learn from that? So maybe it wasn't a failure, maybe it was a success. It depends how we define. And then how do we define success? Is success financial success? If I did very, very well financially, And I was, I don't know, a Forbes 20 lister. Am I successful? Do I have a nice family? Am I healthy? Am I happy? I'm not saying these people aren't. I'm saying, how do we quantify success or failure? Business terms is different to human terms, is different to our personal feelings. A lot of us are successful, but we don't realize it because we're trying to measure success against finances or career or ego, which is our biggest enemy, right? Yeah. Am I successful? I don't know, because this person thinks this of me and that person thinks that of me, and I did a podcast with Eli and I opened up too much, so am I failure or am I success? Whatever it is, I think before we can say we're successful or failures, we have to quantify what that means for us. There's business success, and there's financial success, and there's personal success, and there's emotional. There's a whole bunch of successes and failures. But for the most part, and here's the soft side coming out again, COVID really did this to me. Like, if we are good people, most things are successes, even things that at the time seem like failures or wrong decisions, can be turned into successes if we learn from them and don't repeat them. The only failures that are really failures that we can't bounce back from are ethical or moral failures, where we make really bad decisions that are bad for others. Other than that, a financial failure, excuse my French, but fuck that. It's just money. It's just money. Go out, you work, you earn money again. You spend less than you make, you'll have money in the bank. Yeah. I don't know if I'm simplifying it, especially for a lot of people that have recently lost their jobs and stuff, but is that a failure? What's a failure, right? Yeah. What is it? Maybe the failure is that when I was working, I didn't put money aside for a rainy day. COVID's taught all of us about that, right? But okay, am I saving money now? So then it's a success, not a failure.
Yeah, no, and I think what's interesting is, is in some ways people can think that's super, like, is it that easy? Like, is that simple? Like, like in the U.S., and I'm sure it's used across the world, right? There's that phrase of keeping up with the Joneses, right? If I'm keeping up my appearances so that my neighbors appreciate what I look like, or Facebook friends appreciate what I look like on Facebook and social media, then that's success, right? Or if I don't, well, now I'm failing. Right, but to your point, like at the end of the day, what does it really matter? Like, it's each individual has to determine what that success is, because to your point, like, I did the same thing when I started and lost my business from 2008 2010. I learned so much from that experience, from that failure, and some stuff I'll go like, I know I'll never let myself get to X point again. Exactly. To your point, some of it was like that personal equity. Like, I was so invested in others that I didn't make those business decisions to go, here's where we have to cut the cord. I wanted to give back so much, and that's not bad. But if you do want to be successful numbers at a business in long term, you have to figure out like what does make appropriate business financial sense in the long run. Like, so those kind of learning lessons you don't get if you don't mess up and you don't fail. And so to your point, it's if you're able to take something out of those experiences, then what really is that failure, right? And one thing that I've mentioned a couple podcasts, and I do like my little daily doses every now and then, I always mention, like, even at your lowest point when you're failing, if you look around you and your circle of influence and circle of friends, there's always someone that you can reach down to and help lift up, right? And even when you're in your lowest point, you're like, be it business, be it relationship, be it work, and you're like, oh my gosh, the world is crumbling around me, poor me, poor me. Taking yourself away from yourself and going, to your point, like, what is success? Like, am I healthy? Do I have a family? Do I have this relationship? So regardless of all these other things happening, I always say, like, if you're able to look down and around you and maybe lift someone else up, you'll realize you probably have it better than what you think you do.
Absolutely. And for all the folks out there that are thinking of starting businesses or in businesses, or small, large businesses, they need to understand business success or failure does not necessarily equate personal success or failure.
Yeah.
It's a business.
Yeah.
When we are old and well, I'm already gray, or when I'm older and grayer, what does it really matter? Right? What matters is if your impact on the people around you was positive or negative. To me, that's success.
Yeah. No, and I think that's great. I think, and that kind of gets to me back to one of the notes I made up here above. Right after you talked about earlier, your first business successfully managed it into the ground, and then just knowing in your heart of hearts you've always wanted to be your own business, leading from the front. Like, what advice do you give? Like, I think you're right. Like right now, like that last little point of business success does not equate personal success. I think that's fantastic. And like right now, in not if you take even economy aside, but even like Facebook, we're all active on Facebook. I reached out. There's many of my former, I'm sorry, LinkedIn. I said Facebook. LinkedIn. We're all active on LinkedIn. But a lot of my former Facebook friends and people that I hired were all impacted by layoffs. I have a friend that was impacted by Stripe. I know Microsoft was mentioning stuff as well. So you have this huge industry shift. And now people might be left in that boat of, poor me, woe is me, what do I do? Not to say everybody wants to be a business owner, but to your point, if even someone has an inkling, this might be that time to be able to push something forward, for yourself, to take ownership of your own future. Like, what advice would you give if someone is on that precipice of, do I do it or not? What would you say to someone?
I think the best advice I could give someone from my own experience is, don't do something that you think everyone will want. Do something that everyone wants, right? So be honest with yourself. If you can't explain the value in just a few sentences, choose something else. Now's not the time to create a market, and now's not a time to educate the market. Now's the time to identify what is the pain, and do you bring a solution to the table that solves the pain. And one of the things I personally do in my own time, I mentor some startups, and I'm on the board of a few startups. Whenever someone pitches me and says, do you want to work with us? Do you want to do this? That's the first question. I say to them, well, what problem are you solving? And if they start telling me about how the technology is built, and I'm really not interested, just tell me. I don't want to know what technology you're using. I want to know what problem are you solving. So anyone that's looking to start a business, first of all, I say, that's awesome. Second, I'll say, understand what solution you're bringing to the table. And if you yourself can't speak about it, it doesn't exist. Work on it a little longer, and don't risk your personal equity to do it. Right? So it's great to have a dream, but you've got to pay the bills as well. So I'd say to people, if you have a dream to start a business and you don't have a lot of money in the bank and a big safety net, go work somewhere. While you're working, as long as you're not infringing your contractual obligations of employment, etc., start your business on the side while you have a safety net. That's really, it's not really one piece of advice, it's a whole bunch. But that would be my advice to people, is don't put everything in unless you're sure. And I'll also say, going back to basics, if you don't buy a ticket, you can't win a prize.
Yeah.
Like if you don't take the risk, then you can't do it.
Yeah.
But yeah, for the folks out there thinking of going into business, do it for the right reasons. Have fun. I actually wrote an article on LinkedIn a few years ago on 10 steps to starting your own business and a successful small business for what it's worth. And really, I don't remember exactly what I wrote, but off the top of my head, it was do good, believe in what you're doing, enjoy what you're doing, and be honest with what you're doing. Listen to the market. Don't argue with the market. If I'm selling red balloons and the market's asking for blue balloons, I shouldn't try to convince them that red balloons are better. I should sell blue balloons.
Yeah.
Now, that's business.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's on LinkedIn somewhere from a few years back. But love what you do, believe in what you do, and do it.
Yeah, it might be a good time to repost that thing and just like a refresh. Hey, everyone, just I'd read it. Right. Do that definitely. Pivoting to just leadership. We have we'll go a little bit longer here, but I think there's one thing I want to touch on before as I want to respect your time, but as I have you here, for leadership. What do you think makes a good leader in life, and is there a difference? is there a difference of being a leader at home and being a leader at work? Like, what do you
So
feel?
I think that there are two types of leaders, Elon. There's leaders that are born leaders, and you can see from a very young age that when they're playing at kindergarten, the other kids follow them, and when they're at junior school, there's born leaders, and there's leaders that are made leaders or that learn to become leaders. Um, so I think that's the very first thing, is to understand that there's born leaders, and they've just got it, right?
Yeah.
What makes them a leader? They just got it. They're just leaders. People listen to them. People follow them.
Yeah.
There's lots of qualities for a successful leader. Um, these include a good balance, and it's an undulating balance like an accordion, between confidence and humility. So always be confident, but listen to those around you. It doesn't mean you need to agree with those around you, but at least give them your ear. Do what you say. A good leader has to have a high level of integrity, which I believe is hardwired. If you do not have a high level of integrity, you're not a leader. You may at best be a bad manager. You may at best have a big stick, but you're not a leader. People will follow you because they have to, because they want to keep their job. They're not going to follow you because they want to follow you.
Yeah.
Right? Be empathetic when you need to be empathetic, and be hard when you need to be hard. Emotional intelligence is a massive part of successful leadership, is understanding when to be hard and when to be soft. And the list goes on. I think we can do a podcast, all on that, on leaders.
Yeah.
But really, the bottom line is, a good leader has to have a high level of integrity, a high level of emotional intelligence, and they also have to have a high level of humility to know that they might be the leader and they might have the last word, but they don't know everything.
Yeah.
You look at the leaders in our industry, in the tech industry, right?
Yeah.
Most incredible people in the world, right? Just geniuses.
Yeah.
But they'll go to their for legal advice on coding or whatever it is. They'll go to coders for advice on coding. They might be master coders, but they'll still go to their people for advice, right?
Yeah.
They'll go to their family office for advice on investments in real estate or whatever it is. Those are good leaders. They listen to people around them, and they choose the right people that they can listen to,
Yeah.
right? And there's different types of leaders. There's different types of leadership. There's leaders that are very sort of democratic, that say, all right, everyone has an opinion, and has its place, but it also has its weaknesses. There's leaders that say, only I have an opinion.
Yeah.
And again, that has its place, but it's, different types of leadership are more to different situations, or they should be, as opposed to different people. So depending on the situation, you can be this type of leader or this type of leader per scenario, per situation.
Yeah. Being able to be adaptable and meet people where they are, right? It's
Absolutely.
Not one approach every situation.
Absolutely, and at the risk of ruining my credibility of being humble and sincere, these are the sort of things we cover in our leadership programs.
Yeah. Love it. Love it.
And we cover them with a leaning towards the security field,
Sure.
but not limited to.
Yeah.
So we've got some clients that are not in the security field that are looking at us for leadership programs in the organizations. Leadership is leadership is leadership. And then what we do is we cater it to that industry. So if you're coming from the security field, the examples we give in the case studies are from our industry.
Yeah.
If you're on super top tier real estate, it's going to be from that industry. If it's tech, it'll be that industry.
Yeah.
So that's what we do.
Yeah. Do you think there's a difference between leadership in the business and what about home?
Absolutely. In business, absolutely. I'd say a lot of the leaders in business don't want to be the leaders at home. They just want to put their feet up. I'd also say, tongue in cheek, but not. If you come home and you try to be too strong of a leader, the ramifications are greater, right? I think it's different. I think naturally people are leaders, and I'll give you a great example. I was working many years ago with one of the globe's most influential tech leaders. Fantastic person at work, just a good person. And I worked with them on a personal trip somewhere. And I saw on the personal trips, the small big things, I call it, the little big things, right?
Mm.
When they were going in somewhere, into a restaurant or into somewhere, whereas usually they'd go first with the executive protection, opening the door and doing their thing. Excuse me, when this was removed, it was just them and their family. They'd be the ones holding the door for their kids and their spouse. They'd be the ones going in last, right? They'd be the ones taking a step back.
Yeah.
Still the leader of the family, no doubt.
Yeah.
Like unshakable leader of the family, without a doubt. But leading in a different way.
Yeah. No, I love it. I appreciate that. Yeah, I think lots of great points, and I think that one of the principles that I have, that sets the foundation for my book is, I call it care, right? So all successful leaders should have
Absolutely.
care, and it's it's an acronym, and it has meaning in of itself, but also an acronym for having concern, authenticity, being realistic, and being empathetic, right? And so, to your point, I think is having concern for others in the workplace, being authentic with yourself, and humbled and not trying be something that you're not. And realistic kind of gets to your point. It's that hard line. Like, there are times where I need to be realistic with my own abilities, but then also I need to be realistic with the abilities of others. And to your point, it might mean that I have to performance manage or help others get through some barriers, but it's that realistic approach of management as well. And then certainly being empathetic. I don't think there's enough said about empathy. And I think right now, especially all the stuff going on LinkedIn and people being impacted by economy and business, I don't think we can have enough empathy for some of these folks that are now thrust into the workplace. And how many thousands of people now do we see on LinkedIn, that hashtag open for work? Like, it's heartbreaking. And so, again, as a leader, the empathy definitely has its place. And sometimes the hard part is, as a business owner, and this gets on what you and I touched on as well, is there are times where, unfortunately, as empathetic as I might be, the realistic side of me says, I have to make this business decision. Absolutely. And it might mean letting people go. Absolutely. I can do so empathetically, but I have to be realistic.
So that's the thing. So there's a lot of stuff out on the interweb at the moment about organization A versus B versus C and how they did the layoffs. And you can see a stark contrast between that empathy. Has it been a group email? Has everyone been called into a room? Yep. I remember the startup that I mentioned. Eventually the startup was acquired, but we went through quite a rocky road until it was acquired. And the one day the CEO called everyone into the office and said, look, we were expecting investment from an angel. They got cold feet at the last moment, and quite honestly, if we don't close the doors today, we won't have any money to give you guys a severance because operating costs will eat that up.
Yeah.
So some of you will go on, some of you will stay, some of you, they said, anyone whose name's not called out, stay in the room. And I think that sort of thing was a bit harsh. You don't get everyone in a room and say, all right, so separating them. It's not the right way to do things.
Yeah.
That said, I've never worked in a massive organization with tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of people that's had to do mass layoffs.
Yeah.
I don't know how you can do it, and I think that we also have to be empathetic to those leaders that have got a very difficult job to do now, in both laying off people, which shouldn't ever be easy, and I don't believe it's easy knowing the people, knowing the personalities. And they also have to go back to the people that have stayed in the organization after laying off their friends and colleagues and everything and lead them. So I think that empathy, especially in today's scenario, which I believe is just getting warmed up, and I think that with all the layoffs, I think we also have to be empathetic to those people who are making the decisions and acting on those decisions, because I don't care who you are, it's not easy.
Yeah.
No one's enjoying it. So absolutely empathetic to the people that are now, okay, how do I earn a living? But they've also probably got severance for several months, if not longer, which doesn't make it easier. It's just a fact. But also empathetic to those leaders that are having to do it and make the decisions, which I don't believe for a second is easy, and I don't believe for a second they're sleeping well at night.
Yeah, it's I'm a fan of acronyms in my leadership book. So another one I talk about is um, being a lead. If you want to be a leader, you have to be sure. And I say it's being a leader is selfless. It's unending. It can be rewarding, but it's exhausting, right? And I think
Absolutely.
is to your point is not to say it makes it any easier for them, but I think is just to your point is recognizing the leaders themselves. Well, even if they do have a job, because they didn't get affected, they're affected. Unfortunately, that's a burden these folks
And they're
will
human.
carry on with them. It's not a fun job to do. Someone has to do it, but doesn't mean
Correct.
they have to enjoy it.
So I've got a question for you, Eli.
Yeah.
Have you got a title for your book?
It's a work in progress. Believe it or
Okay.
not, super simple. Successful Corporate Leadership is the title of my book.
Fantastic. Love it. Love
It's
it.
I will definitely keep you apprised. It's coming out next year, but like yourself, I'm building a training platform as well, and so I'll share the link with you. I'm invited to get your opinion on my platform, but Beth says hello, by the way, and so
Warm regards.
yeah, Beth and I are working on delivering a training platform. So yeah,
Awesome.
I'll be anxious to get your opinion on it. So.
Happy to.
Well, fantastic. I think it's a perfect timing here. I want to respect your time. So I'll bring this to an end today. So everyone, I enjoyed my time. We have Ivor Terret from Enablement Advisors. I will make sure that as we post the podcast, there'll be links to his website. Check out his training protocol. Global leader, global trainer, travels everywhere. Certainly look up his content. Look forward to potentially having him on again. I'm sure this is the beginning of a conversation, not the end. But thank you, Ivor, and
Thanks for the opportunity, Eli.
absolutely, it's been great. And I'm Eli Alblos, your host, and this is Eli's Echo. Thanks.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that content and that conversation with Ivor. Fantastic person. I have links to his online training and links to his business. So do me a favor, check him out on LinkedIn, visit his websites, show him some care and love from Eli's Echo. That's it for now. I appreciate all those that are listening, and all the comments that are coming in really are helpful, so keep those coming. Before I sign off, just a reminder, do me a favor, pick up a phone, text message someone, drop by someone's house, but visit those loved ones that really mean something to you, especially during this holiday season. This holiday season hits everyone differently. You never know who might benefit from your outreach, and you never know how much more time you have with individuals, so make it last. Thanks everyone. That's it for now. This is Eli's Echo, and I'm your host, Eli Abelos. Thank you.